The temperature read 29 degrees on the dash of Wade Pruitt's Ford F-250 when he came down the gravel drive at 3:14 in the morning and saw two flatbed trucks already backed against his machine shed, hazard lights ticking against the dark like something counting down. Furnace County, Nebraska doesn't get visitors at that hour. Not for anything good. The man closest to the tractor wore a reflective vest with county line towing stitched over the pocket, and he didn't look up right away. He had a clipboard. He had a flashlight clamped under one arm. He had the posture of a man who had done this before and expected it to go the way it always went. Quiet. Quick. Over before the coffee got cold back at the office. It didn't go that way. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stand back," the man said, not looking up from the paperwork. "Whose paperwork is that?" Wade said. "Bank's." "Which bank?" The man looked up then. "Cornerstone Ag & Trust." "You're Wade Pruitt?" "I am." "Then this doesn't concern you standing here in the cold. Go on back in the house. We'll be done in 20 minutes. Wade didn't move. He had a folder under his arm, the kind you'd keep tax returns in, soft at the corners from 40 years of handling, and he held it against his chest with his thumb hooked under the edge of it, the way his father used to hold a coffee cup on a cold morning, like it might slip. Nobody in that driveway knew yet what was in it. Not the tow crew. Not the man from the bank standing off to one side with his hands in his coat pockets, not wanting to be the one talking. Not even, if he was honest with himself, entirely Wade. He would find out he needed it in about 11 minutes. To understand what happened next, and why a document written in 1954 mattered more than a mortgage signed in 2016, you have to go back to earlier that same year, to the spring Wade Pruitt missed his third loan payment in a row, and to a decision his grandfather made 65 years before any of it, in a lawyer's office in Norton, Kansas, that nobody in the family fully understood the point of until now. This is the kind of story my father would have told at the kitchen table, in no hurry to get to the end of it. If yours did too, stay with us, subscribe, and we'll keep telling them. Furnace County sits in the southwest quarter of Nebraska, wheat and cattle country. The kind of place where the grain elevator in Beaver City is still the tallest thing on the horizon for 11 miles in any direction. Wade's place was 9 miles north of town, on a section his grandfather had homesteaded and his father had doubled. 440 acres of corn ground and native grass pasture, with a herd of 90 Black Angus cows that had wintered that year on corn stalks and hay he'd put up himself in July. March in that part of the state comes in cold and leaves colder. The ground was still frozen 2 inches down. The wind that night moved steady out of the northwest at maybe 15 miles an hour. Enough to make the flatbed's idling diesel engines sound louder than they were. Enough that Wade's neighbor across the section road, Otis Vance, 71 years old and 11 years retired from the rural mail route, woke to light through his bedroom curtains before he heard a single engine. Otis didn't know what he was looking at yet. He stood at his kitchen window in his robe for a long 4 or 5 minutes, trying to make sense of 2 flatbeds and a pickup, with a bank's magnetic door sign parked in his neighbor's yard at an hour when nothing in Furnace County moves except deer and weather. He almost went back to bed. He didn't. There was one detail in that yard that didn't belong to the scene the bank had planned for. Everyone standing there that night, the tow crew, the banksman, even Wade himself, some part of him, expected this to be a transaction. Trucks come. Equipment loads. Trucks leave. What none of them expected was for an 82-year-old man's handwriting, folded into a document older than the loan officer standing in the driveway, to be the thing that decided how the night ended. The banksman was named Dale Kessler, 39 years old, senior loan officer out of Cornerstone's branch in Alma, and he hadn't personally handled a farm equipment seizure before that week, Cornerstone usually left it to the tow company and a certified letter. But the account had gone sideways enough that his branch manager wanted eyes on it directly, and Dale had driven out at 2 a.m. without much enthusiasm and even less curiosity about what Wade Pruitt might have to say for himself. The dispatcher who'd routed the tow trucks, a woman named Sissy Voth, who'd worked the county line towing switchboard for 26 years, would tell people afterward it was the strangest call she'd taken since a loose llama shut down Highway 6 for an afternoon back in 2014. She had nothing to do with what happened next. She just answered the phone. "Wade, I know this isn't easy," Dale said, staying by his truck. "But you're 91 days past due on a note for $340,000. And the bank's within its rights under the security agreement you signed." "I know what I signed," Wade said. "Then you know how this works. I know how you think it works." Dale didn't laugh. Exactly, nobody laughed. Not out loud. Not in a yard that cold at that hour. But there was a particular kind of patience in how he looked at Wade, the patience of a man who has already done the math and is only waiting for the other man to catch up to it. Not cruel, exactly, just tired of farmers who thought a lawyer somewhere had found them a loophole nobody with an actual law degree had thought of first. The tow crew kept working. A man named Rudy had already dropped the ramps on the first flatbed and was walking toward the shed where a John Deere 8345R sat next to a Case 2388 combine and a New Holland baler, 3 machines that, according to the loan file in Dale's truck, secured a debt Wade had no realistic way of paying that spring. 91 days, Dale said again. Like repeating it might make Wade understand it faster. "That's not me being difficult. That's just where we are." "You're not wrong about the 91 days, Wade said. He opened the folder. "You might be wrong about whose those are." The equipment itself told its own story if you knew how to read it. The 8345R was 7 years old, 4,100 hours on it, worth somewhere around $110,000 at clean auction condition. Maybe less that March with corn at $3.60 a bushel and nobody flush enough to bid it up. The combine was older, bought used in 2011, worth perhaps $60,000. The baler, less than that. Altogether, the 3 machines might have brought $190,000 on their best day at a sale barn. Nowhere near the $340,000 the note called for, which was itself part of why Cornerstone wanted the equipment moved fast, before a Nebraska winter turned metal that was already losing value into scrap that lost it faster. Dale believed, reasonably, that this equipment belonged to Wade Pruitt the same way it belonged to him on the loan application, personally, entirely, the kind of belonging a bank can reach with a writ. Rudy believed it too. So did the sheriff's deputy standing by his cruiser at the end of the driveway, arms crossed against the cold. There because Cornerstone's lawyer had told the branch manager it was smart to have law enforcement present for a seizure this size. Nobody in that yard, including at some level Wade himself until he'd gone looking 11 months earlier, understood that the tractor, the combine, and the baler in that shed had never actually been titled to Wade Pruitt as an individual. Not since 1954. Not on paper. They were titled, quietly, legally, in a filing cabinet in a courthouse in Norton, Kansas that almost nobody had opened in 60 years, to something called the Pruitt Family Land and Equipment Trust. Wade hadn't gone looking for a loophole. He'd gone looking, 11 months before that March night, for anything that might buy him time. After the 2018 drought cut his corn yield almost in half, and Cornerstone's loan committee started using words like workout and restructure in letters that arrived every few weeks. He'd spent 3 evenings in his kitchen going through a lockbox his father had left him, mostly expecting nothing. Old cattle brand registrations. A deed to a quarter section sold off in 1979. Tax receipts nobody would ever need again. He almost skipped the folder marked, in fountain pen gone brown with age, Pruitt Trust, do not discard. His father had never once mentioned a trust. Wade himself had run the operation as a sole proprietorship his whole adult life, the way most everybody in Furnace County did. The way the bank's own paperwork assumed he did. He read it twice before he understood what he was looking at. He read it a third time at his kitchen table with his wife, Marlene, asleep upstairs, and a cup of coffee going cold in front of him, and he still wasn't entirely sure. So he drove to Norton, Kansas the next week, to the same courthouse where the document had been filed, and paid a clerk $4 for a certified copy, and sat in his truck in the parking lot reading it a fourth time before he let himself believe it. Otis Vance noticed something was different about Wade that spring, though he couldn't have said what. Wade had started stopping by more, asking questions about how his own father had run cattle back before Otis took over the mail route. Questions that didn't seem to be about cattle at all. Otis didn't think much of it at the time. Old men get curious about old things. It's usually nothing. This time, it wasn't nothing. Earl Pruitt was born in 1911 and buried in 1988, and for most of his life he didn't talk much about the years between 1931 and 1936, when his own father lost 240 acres of Furnace County ground to a bank in McCook that no longer exists under that name. Earl was 20 years old when the sheriff's sale happened. He watched the auctioneer work the crowd. He watched the number climb past what the ground was worth in a good year. He watched a man who'd driven up from Omaha the day before buy his family's future without once getting out of his car. He didn't forget it. He didn't rebuild the same way, either. By 1954, Earl had clawed back part of the original ground through renting, then buying, then renting more, and he'd married a schoolteacher named Doris, who kept better books than most bankers. And between the two of them they'd put together 440 acres free and clear, no mortgage. Paid for in cash and patience over 18 years. That was the year he drove to Norton with a lawyer named Homer Aldrich and set up something almost nobody in that stretch of Kansas or Nebraska was doing at the time. A family trust that would hold not the land itself, which Earl kept in his own name for tax reasons, but the equipment and the herd, the working capital of the operation, separate from whoever happened to be running it and whatever debts that person happened to carry in their own name. Earl never fully explained why to his own son. He left a notebook instead, one Wade found as a teenager and read without understanding a word of it, in which Earl had written, in handwriting that got shakier every few pages, that a man could lose his own foolishness, but he shouldn't lose what his children needed because of it. Wade had thought at 16 that this was just an old man being strange about paperwork. He thought about it differently at 44, standing in his own driveway with a certified copy in a folder held against his coat. He never fully understood, even now, why his own father hadn't explained it plainer, or why the knowledge had nearly skipped a generation entirely on nothing more than a filing cabinet and a stubborn old habit of keeping things. He didn't know. He'd stopped needing to know. It was enough that Earl had. What it meant, in plain terms, standing in that driveway before 4 a.m, was this: the tractor, the combine, and the baler had never been Wade's personal property to pledge as collateral in the first place. When Wade signed Cornerstone's loan documents in 2016, he'd signed as an individual borrower, and the equipment schedule attached to that note listed machinery he operated and insured and kept running, but did not, strictly speaking, own free and clear as an individual. It belonged to a trust established in 1954, one that had never been dissolved, that Wade's father had continued without renaming it, that Wade himself had continued without fully grasping what continuing it meant. Cornerstone's security interest was valid against whatever Wade actually owned personally. It could reach his cash accounts. It could, eventually, reach the land itself, since Earl had kept that titled individually, and it had passed down that way. But a security agreement can't attach to property the borrower never held title to, and title to that equipment sat with a trust the bank's own underwriters had never asked about. Because nobody in Furnace County in 2016 made a habit of asking a fourth-generation farmer whether his tractor belonged to a document his grandfather filed during the Eisenhower administration. That was the mistake. Not fraud, not deception, just an assumption nobody had bothered to check. Dale took the folder. He read it under the dome light of his truck twice, while Rudy stood by the flatbed with his hands in his pockets, and the deputy walked over to see what had stopped things cold. "This says trust," Dale said. "It does. Filed in Norton County, not here. Equipment doesn't have to be titled in the county where it's used." Dale looked at the certified stamp. He looked at the date. 1954. He looked at Wade. "You're telling me this equipment isn't yours. I'm telling you it isn't mine the way your loan thinks it's mine." Nobody moved for a moment. The wind came through the yard light and made the chain on the flatbed's winch tap once against the frame. A small metal sound that seemed loud in a silence that had nothing else in it. Rudy looked at Dale. Dale looked at the deputy. The deputy looked at the paper like it might change if he looked at it long enough. "I need to call the branch," Dale said. He called at 3:41. He was on the phone for 6 minutes, standing off by the mailbox with his back half turned, and Wade could hear only pieces of it. "Trust document, 1954. Don't have anyone here who can verify. No, sir. Not comfortable proceeding without legal signing off on this first." When he came back, something in his posture had changed. Not defeated, exactly. Just recalculated. "We're not loading anything tonight," Dale said. "Legal wants to review the trust documentation before we move on any of this equipment. I want to be clear, this doesn't resolve the default. You're still 91 days past due on $340,000. That hasn't gone anywhere." "I know it hasn't," Wade said, "but we're not taking equipment that might belong to an entity we haven't verified. That's not how Cornerstone operates." "Truck's empty," Rudy said, mostly to himself, folding the ramps back up without being told twice. He didn't say much to Wade on his way past, just a short nod, the kind two men give each other when one of them has watched something he didn't expect to see and doesn't have words for yet. The deputy was the last one to leave. He paused by his cruiser and said, mostly to himself, "Well, I'll be." 3 words. Nothing more. He didn't know Wade Pruitt from anyone else in the county before that night, and he'd tell the story at the sheriff's office coffee pot for years afterward, without ever fully getting the legal details right. But he'd always get the ending right. They left, with empty trucks. Otis Vance watched the whole thing from his kitchen window without knowing any of the words being said. He watched 2 flatbeds leave a driveway with nothing on them at 20 minutes to 4 in the morning. Watched a bank truck follow them out with its headlights low and slow like it had somewhere to be, but wasn't in any hurry.